Politico is reporting that Florida Congresswoman and intellectual heavyweight Paulina Luna has introduced a bill to put Donald Trump on Mount Rushmore. Wait, it gets better. Our new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, said in an interview yesterday that acquiring Greenland is not a joke. Rubio saying the quiet part out loud. He insisted with the polar ice caps melting, Greenland is a mineral-rich territory that is necessary for America's security. He said Trump's threat to take Greenland by force is just a negotiating ploy. Ask E. Jean Carroll and about 50 other women, when has Donald Trump ever taken something by force? Never. It's just a negotiating ploy. Greenland belongs to Denmark, and a new poll shows 85% of Greenlanders don't want to become Americans. Actually, they're not too thrilled about being Danish, and a referendum on secession is set to be on the calendar in the next 3 years. The new chairman of the FCC announced he has launched an investigation into National Public Radio and the PBS for airing commercials, even though they claim to be commercial-free. Now, longtime listeners to this show know that I've been screaming about NPR and PBS for a decade. The PBS and NPR pay their executives, their hosts, upwards of $750,000 a year, and they're constantly asking us for money while saying we're advertising free, we're commercial free. But they take commercials, and they're beholden only to their corporate underwriters. Look, sometimes even Donald Trump's FCC chair can be right. PBS, NPR, you're either commercial free or you're not. Don't call yourself commercial free when you run commercials. Someone should also look into war profiteer David Rubenstein from the Carlyle Group. Somebody over at the FCC should look into how David Rubenstein has been able to buy his own way onto the PBS. He has his own show on the PBS. Why? Because he donates millions and millions and millions of dollars to the Washington, D.C. PBS affiliate and Ken Burns. Somebody should look into why David Rubenstein, the war profiteer, is running the Kennedy Center. But, Trump would never look into David Rubenstein. Maybe he would. Joe Biden has spent every Thanksgiving for the past 5 years at war profiteer David Rubenstein's home. As long as Donald Trump is going after people, go after David Rubenstein, the founder of the Carlyle Group. I wouldn't mind seeing that self-satisfied prick locked up for life. He and Bain Capital ended up owning Dunkin' Donuts, by the way. I don't know if the Carlyle Group still owns a majority share of Dunkin' Donuts. The BBC issued a formal apology to its employees yesterday for not taking their complaints about Russell Brand's workplace behavior seriously. The BBC just finished a nearly 2-year investigation into charges that Brand exposed himself to co-workers, verbally and sexually harassed female co-workers, and used the BBC's car service to pick up his 16-year-old girlfriend and return her to her grandmother. By the way, the age of consent in Great Britain is 16. Something to keep in mind when you castigate Prince Andrew. Whatever you want to say about Prince Andrew, the age of consent in Great Britain is 16. Personally, I think the age of consent should be 90, but just for Brits. And now to the tragic news coming out of Washington, D.C. The New York Times reports that a preliminary FAA report now saying a labor shortage is to blame for American Airlines Flight 5342 crashing into a Black Hawk helicopter Wednesday night. All 64 passengers on board that flight, as well as 3 soldiers inside the helicopter, dying, bringing the death toll to 67. This is the worst air tragedy in our country since November of 2001. The New York Times reports that staffing inside the air traffic control towers Wednesday night, quote, was not normal. The FAA memo, according to the New York Times, says Wednesday, one air traffic controller was doing a job normally performed by two people. The Huffington Post now reporting that Mike Whitaker, Biden's FAA head, quit on Inauguration Day. Whitaker saying he was pressured to resign by Elon Musk, who is in charge of Donald Trump's newly formed Department of Government Efficiency. Whitaker, as head of the FAA, hit Musk's SpaceX with nearly $650,000 in fines last year. Whitaker cited SpaceX for safety violations during 3 2023 launches. Safety violations. And Elon Musk was outraged. He responded to the safety violation fines by saying, quote, humanity will forever be confined to Earth unless there is radical reform at the FAA. Well, it looks like Elon Musk got exactly what he wanted. He got radical reform at the FAA. There was nobody in charge of the FAA Wednesday night when the Black Hawk helicopter collided with that American Airlines passenger jet. Donald Trump forgot to name somebody to head the FAA. How could he remember to put somebody in charge of the FAA when he was so busy firing everybody? But now is not the time to politicize a tragedy. After Biden's FAA chief fined SpaceX, Musk immediately threatened to use his vast fortune to sue the FAA for, quote unquote, regulatory overreach. Again, nobody was in charge of the FAA at the time of Wednesday night's crash. Elon Musk ordered the head of the FAA to resign. At least that's the reporting out of the Huffington Post. Why did he order the head of the FAA to resign? Was it because of incompetence? Or was it because the so-called regulatory overreach resulted in SpaceX being fined hundreds of thousands of dollars last year for safety violations? Safety violations. Why do you think Elon Musk reportedly wanted the head of the FAA under Biden to resign on Inauguration Day? Was it because of incompetence, or was it because of the nearly $650,000 fines he got last year, Musk got last year, from the head of the FAA for safety violations over 3 launches of SpaceX? Donald Trump held a post-crash news conference Wednesday and immediately announced he has named a temporary new head of the Federal Aviation Authority. What's the rush? What's the rush? Well, we didn't have anybody in charge of the FAA because, reportedly, out of the Huffington Post, Musk fired the guy in charge of the FAA, possibly over the head of the FAA's obsession with safety. Chris Rushello, after the mid-air collision, was named by Donald Trump as acting administrator for the FAA. Well, less than 2 weeks back inside the Oval Office, less than 2 weeks after announcing massive spending cuts along with massive firings of federal employees, we end up with the worst air disaster since 2001, and there's nobody in charge of our Federal Aviation Authority until yesterday, because the richest man in the world reportedly fired the head of the FAA because the richest man in the world perhaps doesn't like to be fined over safety violations. Well, this is very embarrassing. What is Trump supposed to do? Well, with Donald Trump, the best defense is an incredibly offensive offense. That is why Trump immediately blamed Wednesday night's mid-air collision on black people. Trump, right out of the gate, Thursday said Wednesday's fatal air collision was caused by DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, as we all know, is dog whistle for black people. Trump complained about all the DEI hires at the FAA under the Biden administration, and he said that is what caused the crash. He said, quote, a group within the FAA determined the workforce was too white. They actually came out with a directive saying it's too white, unquote. While federal employees were fishing victims out of the Potomac, federal employees who he has offered to buy out of their contracts, Trump accused Biden of lowering the standards for air traffic controllers. What Trump meant is hired people who weren't white. And to drive home the point, Vice President J.D. Vance stepped up to the podium. Remember J.D. Vance, who spread the lie about Haitians in Springfield, Ohio, eating cats and dogs? J.D. Vance took to the podium and claimed, quote, we want to hire the best people who are actually competent enough to do the job. Yeah, then why were you picked as Trump's running mate? The implication from J.D. Vance is only white people are competent. Then, unable to accept J.D. Vance getting all the attention, President Trump grabbed the mic away from J.D. Vance and lied, claiming that Joe Biden, in order to make it easier to hire people of color, lowered the testing standards for becoming air traffic controller. That's a lie. It's a lie. Trump insisted in order to be an air traffic controller, quote, you have to be naturally talented geniuses. Naturally talented. This is code for white supremacy, genetics. Trump has repeatedly said genes are destiny, which is also code for white supremacy. Yvette D. Clarke represents New York's 9th Congressional District and chairs the Congressional Black Caucus. She responded to Trump's racism by saying, to be clear, diversity, equity, and inclusion are American values. Diversity policies work to benefit all Americans who have traditionally been kept out of opportunities, including white women, veterans, and aging Americans, not just the black and minority communities that Trump and Republicans want to scapegoat. Virginia Senator Tim Kaine called Trump's comments yesterday stomach-turning. Pete Buttigieg, who served as Joe Biden's Secretary of Transportation, called Donald Trump's comments yesterday despicable. You might remember following the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment in 2023, Donald Trump Jr., no diversity hire, Donald Trump Jr. accused Pete Buttigieg of being a DEI hire. This is right after the Palestine, Ohio train derailment 2 years ago. Don Jr. said, quote, Pete Buttigieg has no business in that position. Yes, as opposed to Don Jr., who's earned everything he's gotten. The idiot, Don Jr., continued, but Pete's the guy who had no business running for president, but they let him do that because he's gay, and they check off a box, and then he didn't win, so they said, he's the gay guy, so we got to give him something. Let's make him transportation secretary, unquote. Yes, that's why the Harvard-educated military veteran Pete Buttigieg, who at one point looked like he was going to get the Democratic nomination in 2020, that's why he was picked to head the Department of Transportation, because he's gay. By the way, no planes going down while he was head of DOT. Then Don Jr. resorted to a homophobic trope by accusing Pete Buttigieg of, quote-unquote, chest feeding during the 2021 supply chain crisis. a supply chain crisis created by his father. Well, Pete Buttigieg took time off briefly so he and his husband could have a child, and Don Jr. used the homophobic trope of chest feeding. That is hate speech. But why expect anything less from this hateful loser who nobody would hire? Who would hire Don Jr.? This is why he had to go to work for his father. You know, Don Jr. hated Don Jr. for leaving Don Jr.'s mother for Marla Maples. He stopped talking to Don Sr., hated Don Sr., stopped talking to him. But then Don Jr. woke up one day and realized, I'm a moron. And the only person stupid enough to give me a job is my father. So why did Don Jr. blame the East Palestine crash on Pete Buttigieg being a diversity hire? Because the first Trump administration deregulated the rail industry. So this is what you do if you're a Republican. Instead of accepting the blame, you deflect. And you say, oh, it's the marginalized communities that caused this. D.E.I. caused the mid-air collision Wednesday night, and Pete Buttigieg, diversity hire, caused the East Palestine rail derailment in 2023. The truth is, the Trump administration, before Biden became president, before Pete Buttigieg became head of the Department of Transportation, the Trump administration abandoned rules on brake safety, as well as rules regarding how fast trains could travel. The Trump administration relaxed regulations in order to permit rail companies to transport highly flammable gas without any additional safety measures. You know, cut the red tape. Who needs the government breathing down our back with those damn safety regulations? Right, Elon Musk, who got fined about $650,000 last year by the FAA over safety violations at SpaceX? Who needs the FAA? Trump created a general culture of lax oversight at the Federal Railroad Administration. So that's what you do when deregulation in the service of rich donors, when that ends up dumping vinyl chloride into the air and drinking water. What do? You blame the gays. During his hastily called press conference, Trump was asked how he knew the crash was caused by DEI, especially since they haven't even located the black box yet. Trump said, quote, because I have common sense, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't. Yeah, like everyone who voted for you. It was pure racism, but Trump won't back down. Later in the day, he ordered his FAA to look into the role DEI hires played in Wednesday night's mid-air collision. It wasn't who the FAA hired, it was who Elon Musk fired. You had no one in charge of the FAA because, according to the Huffington Post, Elon Musk got rid of the guy in charge of the FAA, probably because Elon Musk held a grudge against the head of the FAA for fining SpaceX 3 times last year for safety violations. But let's not politicize this. Let's not politicize this. Let's just make it about race, right? Don't politicize it, make it about race. On Tuesday, the Pentagon declared war on DEI. There will be no more celebration of diversity inside the Pentagon, which is odd because alcoholic Pete Hegseth is always looking for any reason to celebrate. The Defense Intelligence Agency officially canceled all DEI observances. Well, that makes me feel safer, right? No more mention at the Pentagon of Martin Luther King Day, Black History Month, and Gay Pride Month. No more mention of Holocaust Days of Remembrance or National Hispanic Heritage Month, because that's why my father fought in World War II. Meanwhile, CNN reporting that Pete Hegseth removed Mark Esper's portrait as Army Secretary from the Pentagon. Esper served as Trump's Pentagon chief, but in his memoir, after leaving the Trump administration, Mark Esper called his former boss, Donald Trump, reckless and undemocratic. He accused Donald Trump of violating norms, to put it mildly, in the lead up to January 6th. Pull his portrait down. This is what Stalin used to do. Mark Esper doesn't exist. You might remember Trump's chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. His portrait was removed from the Pentagon on Trump's very first day in the office. This is what Stalin would do. Mark Milley is a non-person in Trump world. Milley committed the ultimate sin last year of calling Donald Trump, among other things, a full-blown fascist. Donald Trump, who just pulled Mark Milley's portrait from the Pentagon, a full-blown fascist? Donald Trump, who said he wished he had generals who were as loyal to him as Hitler's generals were loyal to Hitler? Donald Trump, a full-blown fascist? One of Pete Hegseth's first acts as defense secretary was removing General Mark Milley's security detail, despite reports of death threats from Iran. Mark Milley is now retired, but Pete Hegseth announced on his very first day that the Pentagon would launch a probe into whether General Milley should be demoted. Because of all the hot spots around the world, the most important, Mark Milley's demotion. Forget Ukraine, forget Taiwan, forget Gaza, forget Syria. Mark Milley was disloyal to mein Fuhrer. We have to investigate him. Politico reporting about the high-pressure campaign inflicted on Republican senators to confirm Pete Hegseth last Friday. According to Politico, no surprise here, Republican senators on the fence not only found themselves threatened politically, but physically. Their family members receiving incessant messages that were threatening in nature. Gee, what a surprise. Hearings were held Thursday on Trump's picks to head the FBI. That would be Kash Patel, the head of the Department of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, and the Department of Health and Human Services, Bobby Kennedy Jr. RFK Jr. was back for a second day of testimony on Thursday. This time, Kennedy appeared before the Senate Health Committee. Wednesday was before the Senate Finance Committee. During 2 days of testimony, Robert Kennedy Jr. refused to say the COVID vaccine saved millions of lives. This is who Donald Trump wants to put in charge of Health and Human Services. Kennedy wouldn't say whether vaccines cause autism, and he wouldn't apologize for constantly claiming that they do cause autism. Senate Republican from Louisiana, Dr. Bill Cassidy, chairs the Senate Health Committee, which held Thursday's hearings. Yesterday, Dr. Cassidy told Kennedy he's, quote unquote, struggling over this nomination. Dr. Cassidy repeatedly asked Kennedy to renounce his claims that there's a link between vaccines and autism. Kennedy said he's still waiting for evidence that proves otherwise before he takes back what he says and apologizes. So Dr. Cassidy held up stacks of evidence, study after study, proving there's no link between vaccines and autism. But Kennedy, a lawyer, not a doctor, refused to apologize or take back the claim that vaccines cause autism. But who needs to hear from a doctor when we've got football coach Senator Tommy Tuberville, who praised Kennedy and said, you know, my son decided not to get his daughter vaccinated for anything after my son did his own research. Yeah, your son did his own research. In other words, he listened to Joe Rogan's podcast on his way to going to hit golf balls. Senator Ron Paul is an ophthalmologist. I guess that's a doctor. During the hearings, Dr. Paul said babies didn't need a hepatitis B shot. Dr. Bill Cassidy, also a doctor, took exception to that. So all it takes is 4 Republican senators to vote no. That sinks Kennedy's nomination to head Health and Human Services. If Dr. Cassidy votes no, and it looks like he might, then Lisa Murkowski, Republican from Alaska, and Sue Collins, Republican from Maine, will probably follow suit. Well, that's only 3. You need 4. The New York Times reporting that Mitch McConnell is a polio survivor as well as an outspoken critic of anti-vaxxers. McConnell stepped up last Friday and voted against Pete Hegseth. There is a distinct possibility Mitch McConnell could be the 4th vote that sinks Kennedy. 1,500 doctors and researchers, 75 Nobel laureates signed a letter urging the Senate to vote no on Kennedy. But what does Jimmy Dore think? During questioning from Bernie Sanders, Kennedy refused to say health care is a human right. This is the son of Bobby Kennedy, who wouldn't say health care is a human right? Kennedy said he was on Medicare Advantage. He's 71. He said, I'm 71, I'm on Medicare Advantage. And he said Medicare Advantage is what every senior should be on, but they just can't afford it. Right there is proof that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is unqualified to run HHS. Anybody stupid enough to go on Medicare Advantage and arrogant enough to say this is what seniors should be on, he should be stripped of the name Bobby Kennedy. Anybody who's on Medicare Advantage is being ripped off, and this is a Trojan horse trying to privatize Medicare. Tell your grandparents, do not go on Medicare Advantage. For Bobby Kennedy to sing the praises of Medicare Advantage, he should be disbarred. He shouldn't even be allowed to practice law. Kennedy then said Americans prefer private insurance to government health care. Yes, he said that. This is what the son of Bobby Kennedy said. He said Americans prefer private insurance to government health care. One of the reasons we have Medicare is because his uncle was assassinated. His uncle, John F. Kennedy, was trying to get Medicare injected into Social Security before he was assassinated. Lyndon Johnson used that assassination, the political goodwill, to get Medicare passed in honor of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s uncle. And you have this arrogant, ignorant POS saying Americans prefer private insurance to government health care? Ask the veterans. Ask veterans if they want to give up the VA for Medicare Advantage. A lot of veterans go on Medicare Advantage, Bobby. And you know what? They end up using the VA instead. Ask the people on Medicare if they want to just turn it all over to private insurance. Ask the people on Medicaid. And you know what? Bobby Kennedy is so ignorant and ill-informed. The audience, some members of the audience, laughed when Robert Kennedy Jr. said Americans prefer private insurance to government health. Where's he been since Luigi Mangione? Have you been paying attention to the response to Luigi Mangione? The audience laughed. Some people laughed. And Bobby Kennedy Jr. took umbrage, and after the audience laughed at his stupidity, Kennedy responded by saying, "You might laugh, but most Americans are unhappy with Medicaid." A lie. And he doesn't understand how Medicaid works. He talks about Medicaid. He thinks people on Medicaid pay premiums. Kennedy, throughout 2 days of testimony, said repeatedly, every abortion is a tragedy, and promised to hire pro-life staffers. He refused to say whether he'd safeguard the use of the abortion pill mifepristone, which I don't know how to pronounce, but he wouldn't guarantee that the abortion pill would be available nationwide to women in red states. He called gender transition care for minors, quote, unconscionable and catastrophic. Kash Patel, Trump's pick to head the FBI, testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Despite publishing an enemies list, Kash Patel denied ever having an enemies list. When asked who won the 2020 presidential election, Patel was only willing to say Biden was certified as president. This is who Donald Trump wants to be FBI chief. Tulsi Gabbard, Trump's pick for Director of National Intelligence, testified before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Thursday. She said, despite what everyone says, she's not a fan of Vladimir Putin. Some people call her not just a fan, but an asset. She says she's not a fan of Muammar Gaddafi, the former leader of Libya, or a fan of Assad, the recently deposed leader of Syria, who she met with. She wouldn't call Edward Snowden a traitor, but did say he broke the law. She was given 4 opportunities to call him a traitor. She refused. He's currently living in Moscow. This is the guy who revealed that the NSA was spying on Americans. Do you think Edward Snowden's a traitor? I don't. I agree with her. Trump's Office of Management and Budget rescinded Tuesday's 90-day freeze, which temporarily turned Medicaid and every nonprofit like Meals on Wheels, every nonprofit in this country that gets federal funding, turned it upside down into a state of panic on Tuesday. If you remember, on Tuesday, Trump's Office of Management and Budget froze trillions of dollars in federal grants and loans, claiming it was an attempt to weed out wasteful spending on what the acting director of the OMB called the pursuit of Marxist transgender D.E.I. ideals. To root out Marxist transgender D.E.I. ideals, they ordered a freeze on trillions of dollars in federal grants and loans. Now, they assured us that Medicaid and Medicare wouldn't be affected. The Medicaid portals for all 50 states were shut down. They're still not reportedly at 100%. And a lot of nonprofits, churches that feed, house, provide community health centers, get funding and loans from the federal government. When you freeze that, people starve. They don't get medicine. So within hours on Tuesday, a federal judge issued a 1-week stay on that order. And because you used your phone, because the switchboards in Washington lit up, by Wednesday, Trump's OMB canceled the entire freeze. That's a win. That's an example of standing up to authoritarianism. Democratic Senator Patty Murray is ranking member on the Appropriations Committee. That's the committee that does the budgeting, and will approve the future OMB director, Office of Management and Budget Director. After Trump rescinded the spending freeze, Senator Patty Murray accused Trump of cruelty, incompetence, and lawlessness, which is what he ran on. She noted, however, the pressure campaign on Trump to rescind the freeze worked. This was a win. We had a win on Wednesday. She called Trump's capitulation on the freeze an important victory for the American people. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said that the spending freeze by the acting director of the OMB could be traced directly back to Russell Vought, who is Trump's pick for permanent director of the Office of Management and Budget. OMB stands for Office of Management and Budget. And Schumer said, therefore, the nomination for Russell Vought to head OMB should be withdrawn. The Republican-controlled Budget Committee, however, voted instead to advance Russell Vought's nomination to the Senate floor for a full vote. The committee voted 11-0. Democratic members boycotted the vote in protest. Russell Vought was instrumental in formulating Project 2025, something Trump said he knew nothing about last year. Russell Vought has talked openly about traumatizing all federal employees, so they want to quit. This is the mop-up for January 31st, 2025. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me. It's hard to find me now. I'll tell you in a second why it's hard to find me. So please share this episode. That's the best way to help. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Subscribe to my channel. This is an audio podcast. You can listen to me wherever you get your audio. I am now on Blue Sky. It's David Feldman. Some people have trouble finding me, so look up The Mop-Up. My handle on Blue Sky is The Mop-Up, so maybe you can find me on Blue Sky. It's getting harder to find the show for obvious reasons, and here's one. Meta is reportedly ready to pay Trump $25 million to settle a lawsuit filed by Trump for throwing him off Facebook after January 6. Mark Zuckerberg showed up at the inauguration. Twitter is also reportedly prepared to settle Trump's identical lawsuit against Twitter for throwing Trump off that platform after January 6, because Elon Musk hasn't given Trump enough money already. Disney, the parent company of ABC, settled last year when Trump sued ABC News after George Stephanopoulos said a jury found Donald Trump liable for rape in the E. Jean Carroll trial. They found him liable for sexual assault, but the judge clarified in writing twice that in common law parlance, they found him liable for rape. New York state laws on rape are very specific, and the judge commented on the absurdity of New York state laws regarding how they categorize rape. Former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez has been sentenced to 11 years in prison after a jury convicted him last year of taking bribes from Egypt. Though Senator Menendez was a Democrat and was a senator, like all convicts, he found the glory in Trump. Menendez told reporters after he received his sentence, quote, "President Trump is right. This process is political and it's corrupted to the core. I hope President Trump cleans up the cesspool and restores the integrity to our system." Yes, everybody who's a criminal gravitates to Donald Trump. In fact, you can't get in the Trump inner sanctum unless you're a criminal or unless your wife or loved one has filed a restraining order. It's pretty remarkable. This is from Notice, News of the United States, NOTUS. You should read Notice. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt is still breaking election law, even though she's been called out by the Federal Elections Commission for misusing hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations to her failed congressional campaign. Notice says she accepted hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal campaign contributions and deposited them illegally in her campaign's checking account. She still hasn't returned much of the illegal cash, despite being ordered to by the Federal Elections Commission. She reportedly owes $326,370 to donors, consulting firms, and vendors. Well, how can you not make her Trump's White House spokesperson? Where's Stephen Chung? And has anybody seen Stephen Chung? Just wait. We haven't heard from Stephen Chung yet. Well, so she's in trouble with the law. Trump, of course, the first convicted felon ever to serve as president. In May, a jury found Trump guilty on 34 counts of fraud. Judge Juan Merchan, a week before the inauguration, gave Donald Trump what is called an unqualified discharge. The conviction still stands. He's still a convicted felon. On Wednesday, Trump officially appealed his conviction. Trump's new lawyers are from the firm Sullivan and Cromwell. Trump's original lawyers can't represent Trump because they're heading to the Justice Department. Emil Bov is already working as acting Deputy Attorney General. He was Trump's attorney in the Manhattan hush money trial, which Emil Bov lost. Todd Blanche also was Trump's attorney in the hush money trial. He's been nominated for Deputy Attorney General. He is awaiting confirmation. Former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, after leaving the Florida AG's office, went up to Washington, D.C. to defend Donald Trump in his first impeachment. She was nominated for Attorney General after Matt Gaetz had to withdraw his name. The Judiciary Committee cleared her Tuesday for a full vote in the Senate. We should see that vote at the end of next week. The vote in the Senate Judiciary Committee was 12-10, with all 10 Democrats voting against her, saying she's just Trump's lawyer and unqualified. Chuck Grassley is the Republican Judiciary Chair, and he wants answers from Donald Trump on why he fired 18 inspectors general without consulting with Congress first. Ranking Minority Leader Dick Durbin signed the letter as well. The USDA Inspector General had to be escorted out of the Department of Agriculture on Wednesday after she refused to leave, calling her firing illegal, which it is. Trump has ordered the deportation of pro-Palestinian campus protesters. He said anybody in this country who's not a citizen, who goes onto a college campus either as a student or as a protester, will be deported for protesting Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Deported. A bill sanctioning the International Criminal Court over Benjamin Netanyahu's arrest warrant has failed in the Senate. A procedural vote was held on Wednesday. It went down 54 in favor, 45 against, 6 votes shy of breaking the filibuster. You need 60 votes to break the filibuster. Senator John Fetterman was the only Democrat who voted in favor of sanctioning International Criminal Court officials for issuing an arrest warrant for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Pennsylvania Senator Fetterman also attended a signing in the Oval Office of the Laken-Riley Act. This bill gives ICE the power to detain and deport an immigrant just for being arrested. Not convicted, not charged. If a undocumented immigrant gets arrested, ICE now has the power to detain and deport. The nation of Colombia says ICE deported 200 immigrants with no criminal records. And by the way, being in this country without documentation is not a crime. It's a civil offense. It is not a crime to be in this country without the proper documents. It's a civil offense. It means you're subject to a fine and deportation. It's only a criminal offense if you resist arrest, which you shouldn't be arrested for, or if you lie. But it is not a crime to be in this country without papers. It's a civil offense. They are not criminals. Colombia says ICE deported 200 immigrants with no criminal records. Among them were 2 pregnant women and a dozen children. Well, I feel safer that we've gotten rid of 2 pregnant women and a dozen children. The New York Times reporting the air conditioner on the flight to Colombia was broken, and of course they couldn't use the bathroom. Their feet and hands were shackled. Donald Trump has promised to ship 30,000 immigrants to Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Senate Finance Committee held hearings Wednesday on Howard Lutnick's nomination for Commerce Secretary. To his credit, Lutnick testified he would count undocumented immigrants in the census. The Commerce Department conducts the census every 10 years. Republicans, especially Donald Trump, doesn't want the census to count undocumented immigrants. Lutnick testified he would count everyone. Let's see what. Well, there won't be a census during the next 4 years. Lutnick ran Cantor Fitzgerald. Yes, that Cantor Fitzgerald. And he co-chaired Trump's transition team. Originally, Lutnick wanted to be Treasury Secretary, but he annoyed Trump. That was what he was hanging out in Mar-a-Lago, and he was like Maury in Goodfellas. You know, where's my money, Henry? I want my money, Henry. And Trump said, get him away from me. Lutnick is worth nearly $1 billion, and he heads 800 separate companies. Yeah, he pays his taxes. One of the companies he heads helps people offshore their businesses to avoid taxes. He has a company, Newmark or something Mark, that helps American companies move to Mexico. Not making this up. So you don't have to pay American workers. He's going to be Commerce Secretary. Heads 800 separate companies. So, how does this work? Why do these people go into government? Well, he's going to turn his fortune, he says, over to his children. Well, that's not DEI, right? That's nothing wrong with turning your $1 billion fortune over to your... That's not diversity. That's not equity. That's not inclusion. So that's perfectly okay to turn $1 billion over to your idiot kids. So why do they do this? Why do they go into public service? Cabinet officials who are wealthy, if you leave Wall Street, like Hank Paulson did to become Treasury Secretary under George W. Bush, Hank Paulson saved hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. Cabinet officials get to defer taxes on their capital gains. So if you're ready to cash out, you go into the federal government. What you do is, well, I have to liquidate everything at the height of the market because everything has to go into a blind trust. So I'm going to sell everything. And thanks to the first George Herbert Walker Bush, if you're generous enough to come be a cabinet official, you don't have to pay capital gains taxes on all the profits you made. In other words, if you're Howard Lutnick or this guy Besant, the Treasury Secretary, or Hank Paulson under George W., if you bought Goldman Sachs stock at $1 in 1990, and it's now worth $100, that means you have $90 in capital gains. You have to pay taxes on the $90, unless you're going to become a cabinet official. You get to defer the capital gains. You get to sell everything, then transfer it all into stocks, like an index fund or bonds. No taxes. And then eventually, when you sell the stocks and bonds, you have to pay taxes on that. But you never end up selling it because you don't need to. And it just gets passed on to your kids. It's estate planning. When billionaires and multimillionaires go to work for the government, it's part of their estate planning. They don't have to pay taxes until they sell all of this stuff, and they're not going to sell it. If you're worth $1 billion, you're not going to sell it. What you're going to do is you're going to borrow against it, live off what you borrow, pay back the loan to yourself, and deduct it. That's how Jeff Bezos lives. Yeah, I know it's supposed to be confusing. Jeff Bezos' fortune is all in stock. So he borrows against it, borrows from himself, then pays himself the interest and gets to deduct all of it. I'm telling you, biggest mistake I made in life, not being a billionaire. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. This has been the mop-up for January 31st, 2025. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. The best way to help me is to share this episode, copy and paste the link to this episode. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow. I'm trying to do more shows until things settle down. Thank you.